Good afternoon. I am Cecily Hill, and I am Director of Community Initiatives at the National Humanities Alliance. Thank you for joining us today for this briefing, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Building Community Through Conversation. In the next hour, we will learn about how National Endowment for the Humanities funding for public humanities discussions enriches our communities. To begin, I'd like to offer some background on these programs. Funded by the NEH's Division of Public Programs, humanities discussions are intended to reach broad and diverse public audiences in non-classroom settings. They engage humanities scholars and community experts, and they encourage communities to think about their local history and culture within the context of the broader American story. These public discussions build space for dialogue and learning, and they offer us the chance to explore our rich histories and come together across our differences. Today, we are hearing from the International Storytelling Center about its program, Freedom Stories, Unearthing the Black Heritage of Appalachia. The National Humanities Alliance partnered with the International Storytelling Center to document the impact of this program by surveying participants. Before we dig into the program itself, I'd like to highlight just a few of the results of that survey. 95% of the respondents agreed that they were able to see connections between themes explored in this program and contemporary issues in our society. 82% agreed that they feel more confident taking part in thoughtful discussions about race as a result of the program. 93% felt motivated to listen to the stories of people whose backgrounds are different from their own as a result of the program. And 96% of respondents agreed that it is important that we collectively explore the stories of Black Appalachia. I could keep talking, but I think you'd rather hear from our guests who can speak more directly about this program. Mr. Kiran Singh Sarah is the president of the International Storytelling Center and producer of the Freedom Stories project. Prior to his appointment at ISC, Mr. Sarah developed a number of award-winning peace-building programs in cultural centers across the United Kingdom. An advisory member to UNESCO and a Rotary Peace Fellow, he has developed educational programs and publications, articles, talks, and conference papers on interdisciplinary approaches to relationship building in communities around the globe. Dr. Alderman Turley is the project director of the Freedom Stories project. An educator and public historian, Dr. Turley has worked in law enforcement as a community organizer and was the first African American administrator for the city of Toledo's first woman mayor, Donna Owens. The founding director of the Carter G. Woodson Center for Interracial Education at Berea College, Dr. Turley is a longtime scholar of history, political science, sociology, and anthropology. Mr. Adam Dixon is the supervisor of the Langston Center in Johnson City, Tennessee. Situated on the site of the former Langston High School, which was a segregated Black high school from 1893 to 1965, the Langston Center preserves the memories of alumni, celebrates the local African American experience, offers artistic and educational programs for students, and serves as a community hub for innovation that addresses social problems. In addition, Mr. Dixon serves as town alderman for the city of Jonesboro, Tennessee, where the International Storytelling Center is located. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to start off our conversation with a few questions before opening up the floor to our audience. If you have questions for our speakers, please place them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. First, Mr. Sarah, can you tell us about the International Storytelling Center, its history, and what it does today?
Absolutely, and thank you, Cecily. It's wonderful to be here. So I'll give you a little bit of background of the International Storytelling Center and to let you know that the International Storytelling Center was actually created in 1973 as an arts, education, and humanities institution. And it was dedicated, the world's first institution dedicated to the folk art tradition of storytelling. Now, the festival itself, the National Storytelling Festival, is considered the world's oldest and largest storytelling festival that attracts around 11,000 people from across the nation and several other countries. And they all come together to hear and appreciate stories from diverse storytellers and a spectrum of traditions that represent the diversity from all across our nation. The festival occurs the first long weekend in October, and as such, it's considered the birthplace of America's storytelling revival. And it's a revival that remains core to our identity today. We are located in the heart of Central Appalachia in Tennessee's oldest town, Jonesboro. And for nearly 50 years, we've become known also for helping to foster storytelling also into a professional and creative industry. as well as the revitalization of our town and region, which in turn has helped to brand our town storytelling capital of the world. It's also become a major tourist attraction, generating around $8 million annually to our local economy, as well as creating over 100 jobs and support for over 3,000 young people, at-risk youth across the Northeast Tennessee region. In addition to public events, the ISE has built a state-of-the-art facility that brings around 26,000 people every year through our doors. But we also work in collaboration and partnerships with many, many grassroots groups, cultural organizations, to help understand and harness the power of storytelling in areas that we call applied storytelling. Some of those partnerships include NASA JPL, Rotary International, the United Nations. We work with the Pentagon teams, Department of Defense, as well as ECA of the US State Department, storytelling and diplomacy. We've worked with the White House Office of Neighborhood Partnerships, Rotary International, and also in our region, Dollywood. We love Dolly Parton because you're our state greatest storyteller. Our work also includes developing trauma-informed storytelling, and that's helping our healthcare sector in our region and across the nation, and particularly during the pandemic, was helping frontline healthcare workers and nurse practitioners to use storytelling to foster care, resiliency, and comfort, as well as patient care. Our work also supports numerous community empowerment and community development fields, helping rural practitioners address the challenges of dealing with poverty eradication, to storytelling approaches in addressing epidemics such as opioid, or promoting literacy in regions considered distressed. And year-round, we host summits, events, in person and digitally, to support storytelling in the classroom or training for teachers, or to enable young people to harness their stories for civic and engagement and leadership, as well as numerous programs to support elder care and community enrichment. In addition, one of our great assets, the thing I'm really proud of, is that we've been collecting stories since 1973, preserving America's stories, which are all held at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. And whenever we can, we use this for advanced scholarship, but also public access to build a sense of pride and belonging in what has become known as the single largest collection that tells the story of America's storytelling movement. There's a lot we do, but that's just a snippet. And so thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you so much. And I know that NEH funding has made a big impact on your work over the past few years. And I was wondering if you can tell us more about that.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you. At the International Storytelling Center, we're guided by a belief, and that is when you know your story and understand your story, then anything is possible. But at the same time, listening and appreciating the full breadth of all our stories not only helps to foster a better listening culture, but also that interaction that creates the conditions for peace and dialogue to flourish. The NEH funding over the past few years has helped us to scale up this work to more communities, particularly underserved, low income, communities of color, LGBTQ groups, as well as develop specific initiatives to bring young people, regardless of who they are, where they come from, young professionals together to harness their stories. They don't just come from the culture sector, they come from young farmers, entrepreneurs, startups, business owners, and many more, community members. And the goal is to bring them tools to help use story as a means to envision the story of the places that they belong to. This has included, thanks to that support, to bring young people from across the 13 Appalachian states, as well as across the states across the US South and beyond. The NEH support has helped us to expand our storytelling research to help transform rural hospitals into storytelling designated spaces, and to help build greater partnerships to create digital storytelling resources to help young and old in the classroom through the youth summits, how they can learn to use those stories in building the community of the story that they wish to see in the world. And I would say one added thing, and something I thought about today, was one of the aspects of what the NEH funding helped us to do was helped us to attract further funding from Silicon Valley, to be able to use a federal grant, to get a matching grant, to scale up this work, bring the dollars into our region for the benefit of the people and the citizens of Appalachia and Central Appalachia. And what we believe is to harness what's already a culturally rich treasure for the people of Appalachia and rural communities everywhere, that this type of support has helped. It communicates the value to help people tap into what already belongs to them, an essential part of their cultural heritage. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And of course, the NEH funded the Freedom Stories project that Dr. Turley is going to talk about a bit more now. So Dr. Turley, can you tell us about yourself and how you became involved in the Freedom Stories project? And then what can you tell us about the project itself?
Oh, thank you so much, Cicely, for the support and for that introduction. Well, I can start simply by saying that I am a Black Appalachian. I grew up in the region, raised in the region, but as a young person, as a young school student, I don't remember anyone ever talking to me or any of my siblings or friends about being Black in Appalachia. So it always felt like somehow we'd been a wandering tribe that ended up by accident in Appalachia. So during the Freedom Stories project really allowed me to learn and teach something that I knew very little about as a young person growing up in the region. It's sort of what I'd wish someone had told me when I was a young student. So the NEH funding allowed us to put on 12 very informative public discussions in a non-threatening, very welcoming manner that allowed for community participation. And I think even though it was not originally planned that way, it went a long way in allowing us to reach a larger audience. So throughout my public career as an academic and as a community activist and scholar, being able to engage people in discussions about difficult topics, you're always searching for the best way to do it. And so Freedom Stories allowed that door to open. And I got involved in the project simply through the suggestion of a colleague who thought I should apply. And then once I had an opportunity to visit the International Storytelling Center and meet with Kieran and to meet with Adam Dixon, who's a board member of the ISC, I was happy they agreed that I was a good fit for the program. And so they allowed me to transform what I thought were just kind of successful ideas into a successful online program. And even though the program had originally been planned as 12 public discussions in the region, of course, the advent of COVID caused us to have to shift to online production, which in many ways allowed us to turn a lemon into very good lemonade because we were able to reach a larger audience, not only the 1.8 million people in Central Appalachia, but many people outside the region and the nation. So the success of the program was in many ways aided by having a confined audience who became regular viewers of the program and supported us much further than, say, people traveling to Jonesboro or Central Appalachia to participate in the storytelling events and meeting some storytellers they may never have met before. Also, it gave ISC an opportunity to add new viewers that may not have ever visited the online of International Storytelling Center, introducing them to something in their region, particularly in minority communities. So I think the program itself did achieve its goal of increasing the community dialogue and diversity discussions in the region that sometimes get overlooked. So I hope that we can continue the discussions. They are now ongoing. That's the other big benefit of the program. The discussions live way past our June 12th closing. We did our last story June 12th of this year, but yet the online access to the stories and the resources continue both on Facebook and YouTube and the International Storytelling Center website. So it's been one of the better programs. I think it has been one of the programs that has a long life, thanks to what has been done just regionally and locally. And we've reached far beyond our boundaries.
Wonderful. And I know the discussions have such compelling topics. And I was wondering if you could just tell us describe a couple of the programs for us, the topics.
Our programming certainly fit with today's public discussions. We began just by talking about Emancipation Saturday, which became, even though it wasn't the most popular program, it became opening discussion, which of course, you know, now Juneteenth is now a national holiday, but very few people, if there hadn't been an August 8th, there would not have been a Juneteenth. So that was a discussion we were able to have with our audience. Do Black Lives Matter in Appalachia became one of those discussions that very timely. And we were fortunate to have scholars to join in the discussion. We talked about slavery by another name. We don't normally think of that Appalachia as having slaves. When I grew up, people were saying there was no slavery in Appalachia, or that there was very mild slavery in Appalachia. But being able to really understand industrial slavery, which had its beginnings in Appalachia, was a wonderful discussion. We had a discussion of the Civil War in Appalachia and the Reconstruction, Black education and segregation in Appalachia, and the building of the Highlander Center and its role in this national discussion, criminalization of race, the study of the Melungeons. So there were 12 very timely topics that you can click on any one of them and end up talking about modern issues we're still discussing in today's time.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And then I want to switch to Alderman Dixon momentarily. Can you tell me more about yourself and how you became involved in the Freedom Stories Project? And then also from your perspective as an alderman and the supervisor of the Langston Center, what can you tell me about the project's impact on your region?
Sure. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you again, Cecily, for this opportunity. Very humbled to be here with my dear friends, Alistine and Karen, to share what I would argue is probably a small contribution to the project, but working with them has been worthwhile. I was elected alderman in 2012, and I've served on the board for about 10 years now. Here in Jonesboro, and a desire of mine has always been to promote the fact that Tennessee's oldest town has a history of interracial cooperation. Sometimes there have been some moments when that point has been understood. There have been some times when it's been a little more difficult to express that notion. But Karen has always seemed to understand the importance of the African-American experience, not only in Jonesboro, but in our region. And for that, I've been personally appreciative. Kieran shared with me this grand opportunity, and I can remember he was asking my initial thoughts, and I was very supportive of the notion of wanting to highlight the African-American experience in the region of Appalachia. And when we heard that the funding came from NEH, that was even more exciting, because there were a lot of individuals that I remembered in my youth that were very lively, colorful characters that really would have added to this project. And of course, they passed on. So just to think that we would be able to not only cover key moments in American history, but also tie that back into individuals and individual experiences, individual stories, to me was just very, very positive and very affirmative. So I've been very excited to be a part of this project. And I think that there are a few benefits from the town of Jonesboro perspective as to why this project was important. First off, heritage tourism. The town of Jonesboro, for about the past probably 40 or 50 years, has made strategic investments in historic preservation, and also in arts as economic development. So the focus on the Storytelling Center, as well as this aspect of our regional story, I think has been very important. Secondly, Freedom Stories reflects the Black experience in Appalachia. And I think that for a lot of African Americans, it was a confidence booster to know that their experience is now discussed, highlighted, illuminated. And I think that that has been a positive. And then lastly, I think that Freedom Stories connects the Black experience to the larger, to the outside world. And so we hope that as an economic development tool, more individuals, particularly individuals of color, will want to consider an area like Northeast Tennessee to stay. And hopefully we can welcome them in Jonesboro, and we can provide, again, a very positive experience when they come to, whether it be for work, play, or whatever the case might be.
Thank you. Now I have a question for all three of you. And the question is simply, can you describe one highlight of the program from your personal perspective and the impact that it had on you? Dr. Turley, I think we'll start with you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned Emancipation Saturday. That was talk number 3 in our public discussions. And I can say, as a person who grew up in Central Appalachia, we celebrated our 154th family reunion, which is always celebrated on the second Saturday in August. And I can tell you that I did not realize the history of Emancipation Saturday was directly connected to Jonesboro, because my grandparents, great-grandparents never said why we did it. I just knew that if we ever tried to change the date, you were looking for a beatdown from the family, elders in the family. So now, having done that discussion, it became very clear, and I've shared it now, that this year's family reunion, why we chose the second Saturday in August, Emancipation Saturday, as a sort of a sacred family reunion holiday, because of the beginnings in Jonesboro, the influence of Andrew Johnson and his freeing of slaves. So that had a wonderful, it was educational experience for me, and to be able to speak with the Park Service and members of the Johnson family descendants who are just now beginning to appreciate their role in beginning this regional and has become somewhat of a national celebration for Central Appalachia. To share that with the region and with the nation was probably my most enlightening and impactful, although it's hard to choose between the 12, but that one personally influenced me.
Thank you. Kieran, would you mind going next?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I start talking about highlights, I might start crying. There's a lot of highlights in this program. And I want to start off the opportunity to work with Dr. Turley and Mr. Adam Dixon, the opportunity to work with incredible storytellers, scholars, African-American scholars across this region, and to come together has just been a phenomenal highlight for me. And I would say also, I came to this country as an immigrant personally 10 years ago to study. I decided to stay. Why did I decide to stay? Because I believe in this country's potential to be one of the greatest peace players in the world. The story of this country is multifaceted, it's complex, it's a tapestry, a beautiful tapestry. And when we understand those multiple stories, we have this great potential to use multiculturalism as a value and as our strength. I would say when I first came to Appalachia, it challenged my perceptions as monolithic culture. But the program has hoped to unpack this idea that actually Appalachia is a meeting of world cultures. It's a doorway to the rest of America. It's an imagined space, but it also has this complexity and this history, as Alison talked about, when I know right on our doorstep was the birthplace of the nation's first anti-racist newspaper, The Emancipator, and that's right in here. And the idea, if people knew this, that we could build such a great sense of pride, you know, the opportunities to learn. And so that has really been a big aspect of me. And I think the idea of the reach, that it shows this concept that you can work locally, but work on a universal theme that is appealing to people all over the world. When people are tuning in from Australia, India, Thailand, Europe, Nigeria, 50 states, 300,000 people at our first single event, just weeks after the murder of George Floyd. But what we were able to do was create a safe space. No one was excluded. people from all political backgrounds, cultural backgrounds could come together and share and be in fellowship. We could hear the stories and personal testimonies, as well as historical events and interpretations of those events, but we could also ask questions. And when we create a space to ask questions, we're tapping into something that's so core to our humanity, our stories. And the idea of really being able to flush that out and create a platform, bring in scholarship, bring in storytellers, community members, and the binding glue that unites us all, the story, the collective story, and how we embed that into our traditions. And so much so the idea of advancing storytelling to address what I believe is the dehumanization of one another. In social media, we see it, in the world, we see it. But stories is that foundation for building trust, understanding, dialogue, and friendship, and most importantly, empathy. And that has been the highlight for me, to build empathy across this complexity and do justice to the individual. Humans have complex minds. And when we respect the human, we should invite curiosity and complexity, because humans can grapple with that. Let's not dumb down those issues. Let's talk about it and provide that safe space for very important dialogue and the friendships that's taken place. And I got to say, the opportunities to cook for my friends as well and have dinner and have fellowship has been a great highlight, personal highlight for me.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Dixon, would you mind reflecting on a highlight and its impact on you?
Sure. So the conversation on Black excellence or educational excellence was, I think, very enlightening to me. When you think about this period of time when we would see a lot of the, whether they were Black high schools or Black colleges developed, there was a societal view that Black people, in some cases, they were ignorant, backward, that they were out of the whole social construct of race, that they were maybe the most maniacal, predatory. There was a lot of stereotypes placed on African Americans in the 1880s, 1890s, leading into the 20th century. And when you would think that all hope is gone, you have a people who display such great resilience, and they form schools, the institutions of higher learning, historically Black colleges and universities. And here in Appalachia, we saw Knoxville College and Swift College and Bluefield State, and we saw these different, institutions develop, and we saw where, very strong, proud, confident men and women learned and grew. And then the institution that I work at currently, Langston High School, even though it was a high school, you still had individuals who taught here who had master's degrees during the period of segregation, when many of their white peers didn't have four-year degrees. But because of segregation, the African Americans could not get decent employment. So you saw those disparities, but yet you still saw attention to excellence. And so many times, I think when we think about Appalachia, we think in a stereotypical light. We let the accent get the better of us, and individuals want to form conclusions based on the accent. Or they wish to think that because we're mountain people that we have, shall I say, mountain ways. And so that conversation on excellence really impacted me to let me know that here in this region, there are some beautiful people, proud people, confident people. And that don't mean to come off as elitist, but I do want to say individuals who really go for the gold. And certainly during the period of Jim Crow segregation, slavery 2.0, we saw a time where Black people, again, displayed resilience, even during the period of segregation. And as Dr. Turley alluded earlier, wanted to make lemonade out of some really rough lemons. So that was very impactful to me.
Thank you so much, all of you. I know that many of the resources from this project are available publicly. Dr. Turley, can you talk about some of those resources, the International Storytelling Center has developed from the Freedom Stories Project, and tell us about where they are and what you can do with them?
Sure. Well, one of the wonderful elements of the grant application was that we needed to have resources that the community could continue to use long after the programs ended. And so one of the great benefits we were able to put together was what we call our online toolkit. So for each story was recorded from Zoom, YouTube, Facebook. But in addition to actually being able to listen to these stories and these comments and wonderful scholarly discussions as often as you like, you also can view the backup material from which these discussions spring. For instance, there are resources for books, for articles, for scholars who teach these subjects, and they're accessible to anyone who wants to go online, click on the International Storytelling Center webpage or Google Freedom Stories and be able to pull these resources up. And you don't have to take our word for it. You can actually read these things for yourself. And so it has been a wonderful resource for teachers who we were able to develop some online curriculum because as teachers, we know teachers are overburdened with teaching. So in an effort to make it easier for them, we did invite teachers to come in and develop curriculum that can be downloaded in addition to the resources to enable educators to quickly be able to introduce their students to these topics. There are other ways. We have a story map. So for all 12 stories on the map, you can actually click on the map and see resources from that region. So if you happen to be teaching in a particular area and you would like to take your students, the information of how to do it and where it's located and all the information necessary for that is available. And so I'm happy to say that we ended on June 12th, but that resource continues to be used. We've had over 1 million plus people. And it doesn't matter if you're a teacher or part of the community who have clicked on to use these resources to continue the dialogue. There are also resources and guidelines for if you want to have your own public discussions, how to go about doing it. So the conversation continues even though our program ended in June. So for me, that's just as a teacher and a scholar, that's a wonderful ending, which isn't really an ending. So.
Thank you. And Karen, I know that this program and the funding for the program has had a big impact on ISC as an institution. And could you tell us more about that institutional impact as well?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to build on what Adam talked about there and Dr. Turley about resilience. And we talk about resilience a lot. We talk about the importance of it. But I think if you ask anyone in Appalachia that, and would understand this, and not just Appalachia, rural communities across, resilience is not just a tool, it's a value. And I think that people can understand that across different communities. When you unpack history, family stories, mountain culture, traditions of the fight for freedom, the struggles for freedom, resiliencies, these stories become our value. And I think, understanding that and bringing that into our institution to be able to build upon. And as Alison talked about, the idea of creating something that we now have a model that we can not just do stuff for us, but help communities all across this nation replicate. And that was the goal of the project. So it can be usable, whether we are looking at, African-American history or Asian American history or European American LGBTQ history, wherever Native, all across the country, that we have a discovery tool, storytelling as a discovery tool. But an important value for ISC is that we are continually paying attention to who's not in the room, whose stories are not represented. That's a core value for us, inclusion. It's the idea that idea should always be integrated. Diversity should be integrated at the beginning and never an added on phenomenon. You don't just diversify an audience to come in. It's like you have to create the content for people that are not there, not represented. And that is something that we really helped us in institutions to learn, our infrastructure, our structures, our way of programming, our thinking, our design, to really embed that into a core practice for all of us. we are an institution that serves a nation. We are based in a region, but we serve the entire nation. And I think the idea, what we're learning from the program is how we can better present, preserve, and go deeper to help people where they are, to appreciate the broader stories of our entire nation. And as I talked a bit about, there's no one story that defines us, no one story that defines this nation. We talk about it as a tapestry, or in Appalachia as a quilt. All stories matter. And I think the idea that when we can, help people see through that complexity, places that they call home, place-based, then we build on that concept called the storyteller knows me. I can listen to a story and what it does, it doesn't, let's say, it brings us closer. A story is the closest distance between two people. It's the same with two groups, two nations. And when you do, you see yourself in that story. You begin to appreciate our collective story is many stories. When we celebrate our nation's freedom, there are many ways we come to it, or in many ways we can appreciate. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. It all matters. I think in terms of impact, I talked about the format, the style, but also just the idea that what has helped us to really important as we move into our 50th anniversary, which what we do is relevant to the nation's storytelling movement, that the Appalachian Black storytelling experience is a tradition for all of us to celebrate and honor and remember, because we're not just marking the 50th anniversary of the American Storytelling Revival next year. We're talking about preserving stories that can be preserved and understood for generations to come. And this, if you remember, is a uniquely American tradition. The Black storytelling movement is uniquely American. And when we can celebrate it, as I talk about, it'll be one of our greatest cultural assets that we can celebrate to the world and invite people. Come to Appalachia and learn for yourself, which is part of their toolkit, so that when people come to attend the National Storytelling Festival and contribute $8 million, stay a week and visit Central Appalachian's places of cultural importance, the Langston Center, or the stories of the Clinton 12, etc. And so the opportunity to really think about, in many ways, you can do cultural tourism, but you can also do justice to the story that needs to be told. And that's a really important part of our learning as an institution, as we advocate for the movement beyond entertainment, a movement that's about really uniting humanity and revealing it.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you. We have time for questions from the audience. So if you're out there and you're listening in and you have a question for our speakers, please enter it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. While we wait for some questions to come in, I want to ask all of you, was there any aspect of the program that exceeded your expectations?
Well, for me, it was the reach of the program. Dr. Turley alluded to it a few moments ago. We anticipated these public meetings. COVID came in, and you really wondered, how will we work with this? You're thinking very locally, and not at all thinking globally, which is probably indicative of my limited mindset. But it was just very exciting to think that folks from all over the world and 1+ million people are learning about our region of the country. So the reach was what caught my attention, and again, far exceeded my expectations positively.
And I have to say the same for me. It even though we were panicked a little bit about, well, how is anybody going to listen? It turned out to be one of the biggest benefits when we would go on and tally the numbers from both those folks who were listening live, those folks who watched it on Facebook a week or two later, those folks who are still watching it on YouTube, and we come up and the numbers begin to hit, we're almost at 2 million folks who have actually watched or listened or participated in some way in the Freedom Stories Project. No one, I don't believe anyone, thought that would happen. And so when we did the numbers and we found out that people in the United Kingdom were watching, and that people in Brazil and Finland and United Arab Emirates. These folks are watching our program. It's very humbling, you know, how much we were able to accomplish with this one little 12 discussion project. I mean, that was pretty amazing, I think. And thanking Kieran and NEH for the belief in the program and the idea for the program. It was just amazing.
I would add that that's probably my dad in the United Kingdom that was tuning in, which is nice because he now understands what I do. Or for many others, but my dad's an elderly Sikh man, and you know, for him to know what we do and know more about a region that I live and I've called home now is really important to me. But I think one of the other aspects was when we did the survey, that nearly half of those people that were surveyed, if you think about our reach, said that they now want to visit Appalachia. They want to express an interest to come to ISC to visit our region. And I think that's really interesting because think about it, you know, often when we think about cultural tourism, our starting point might be, let's do the celebratory stories. But actually, we don't have to always. We can talk about the complex, the difficult, you know, as part of our story. And people want to be challenged. They want to be thought-provoking. And one of the things I think is more perhaps reaffirming, which is a nice idea, is that we've always believed that storytelling is the most accessible form of a cultural expression. But remember what's enshrined in our Constitution's First Amendment, the right to freedom of expression. And storytelling, the idea that storytelling is the most accessible cultural expression of that freedom. And what we're actually doing is going right back to our human rights, things that we value as a people, as a nation, and providing access to that and helping others value their stories, wherever they are, that we can discover it, and we can value it, and we can dig deeper. And it's okay to do that.
Sorry. We have some good questions coming in. Here's one. So if you could scale this project up with unlimited support, what would you do?
Wow, unlimited support. Wow. Never say that to a scholar. So I think one of the first things I would do is try to engage what have been listed as our top 10 universities in the practice of storytelling and listening, to expand the idea of building dialogue through stories, because everyone can relate. That's what we discovered when we did the show and people would give us their online questions. And I think in many ways it was good that folks didn't have to show their face to ask a question. You know, therefore people are more open and more direct in the types of things they were curious about. Maybe something they would never raise their hand and ask in a public forum, they felt free to ask online with a certain level of anonymity, so that you could honestly get to what is disturbing people in their thoughts when they're talking about race or region or class. So I would love to be able to do this story more, this format more for people who were engaged in the practice of difficult dialogues. I think in a classroom setting or in a community building setting, that it has great potential for really getting to the heart of what people are afraid to ask sometimes.
I might build on that as well, just to say that, I mean, there's so much you can do. In many ways, the project, what it did, it touched on subjects like Emancipation Saturday or Melungeon history. And as we know, we've talked, Dr. Turley and I have talked a lot about, you know, there's so much more we could do to go into this project, go deeper and expand it. But one of the things I really would like to do is, I mean, the hopes, if we have no scaling opportunity limits, is bring the collections to it. The national collections held at the Library of Congress, and bring that to build. It's not just listening to stories and engaging through this format, but then empowering young people, teachers, community members to unpack their cultural heritage stories from the National Archives, our archives, collecting from 1973. Imagine if Gullah youth can use the Gullah archives from our collection and build their own podcasts. Or we work with cultural institutions, grassroots associations that are not nonprofits, grassroots groups, elders, families, family gatherings, and be able to bring archives and collections and podcasts and exhibits and help to facilitate more of this work, but bring it more to the people in meaningful ways that's meaningful to them, ultimately, and meet people where they are in the ways that they celebrate their cultural heritage, and to be able to go deeper, but also, build on the program so that, we can work with LGBT centers or Asian American centers, or really build the heritage of and recognize, the indigenous stories of the places that we live, all of us, and go deeper there. And then also the intersectional opportunities to bring this together as a tapestry, to unpack and learn that there's no one story, that we're part of many stories, and that's what we got to celebrate. I see it as a peace building opportunity, really, and something that we really essential for our nation.
If we're talking about unlimited support, I would hope that we could provide more funding for Dr. Turley and Karen and others to kind of take the show on the road, work with communities across the country. I think we all here would agree, and probably many of the people watching today, that our society right now is struggling with the issue of race, and that struggle it's really centuries old. We need positive and constructive avenues to bring the conversation to light, but also to try to work through, as Karen has said, the complexities. And so this is a wonderful way to do it. Freedom Stories is a powerful way to do it. It's not the silver bullet, but it is a powerful way to do it. It brings cultural pride to a group of citizens. It also helps those citizens who now take pride in their sense of culture. It now makes them feel like they are a part of something. And so now when we talk about Appalachia, it's not them, it's us. And that's very important. That's very important. I don't know if you picked up on that or not, but Appalachia is not Jed Clampett and the Beverly Hillbillies. It's us. It's not the Hatfields and the McCoys. It's us. And so we are a part of this region, and this is just as much our home as anyone else's. And that's not said to be antagonistic. It's really meant to be a unifier. Freedom Stories did that, and if we looked at other parts of the country, I think that this could be a healing salve for various other parts of the country. So,
thank you so much. Here's another great question. From your perspectives, what could congressional staff do to help bring these kinds of programs to their communities?
That's a great question. I might, building on that idea, is not everybody's going to enter an art center or theater. And I think it's really doing what Adam talked about, is these belong to you. These culture centers, these stories, they're your stories. They're paid for by the taxpayer. These programs belong to America. And so maybe even advocating for this idea that, don't be fearful of these cultural resources, these toolkits. They belong to you. They belong to you. Take ownership over it, and and demand what belongs to you. And I think advocating, or perhaps meeting people where they are in every part of this nation, there are festivals, cultural events that define that place. And when a program like this can also be replicated, or the examples can be showcased, then maybe it can also invite that family, that heritage program, whether it's deep in the mountains or on the plains or in the deep South, that, going deeper and saying, all these stories matter. Let's celebrate this cultural heritage, whatever it is, even the difficult stuff, and bring it to the fore and really allow for that opportunity for engagement, social interaction, and cultural understanding that can occur as a result.
Right. I would only add that for many people, when they hear the term history, it's really a big sleeping pill for many people. But when they understand that the freedom stories, it allows you to look at this history in very critical ways and connect to a national story. It's not, history is not an abstract. It's something that as a community, as a person, as a family, you participated in making. And maybe you're not always clear how your participation played out on a larger stage. But when you take these individual regional stories, you begin to see that even though your grandparents may have been workers on a railroad line or coal miners or teachers in a rural community, what impact that had nationally. You get to tie into a bigger story than your small piece of the tapestry. Many times we only see our local piece in it, and we don't understand that we're part of a bigger story. So, and that gives a sense of pride, as Adam has mentioned, and as Kieran has mentioned, and it's real for you. And it allows you to really understand your place in this American story. So for me, as an educator, that's what you dream about, getting people more involved in who they are, why they are. And Freedom Stories is a non-threatening way to do it.
Adam, did you have anything you wanted to say there, or would you like me to move on? I don't want to force it, but.
Please move on. I think good answers.
Thanks. So here's a question, I think a great question for all of you. And it's from, so when working with an oral history collection or with an, doing work kind of as an organization that has limited minority representation, do you have any suggestions for best methods for making the archive or making the work more inclusive? And, especially if that organization doesn't already have like direct access to members of those communities, are there ways that you would suggest they reach out and that kind of thing?
I might jump in that one. And that's a great question because it speaks to this idea, what you don't know, find a person that does. And if none of us on my team, me included, I'm a folklorist, but doesn't mean I'm an expert, a scholar of African-American studies or Appalachia, but Dr. Turley is. And I think the really important part of this project is that there was allocated funds, and thanks to the NEH, that helped us to hire a specialist that knows the subject. And that's really important. If in any work we do, making sure that the members of the community that you're working with is at the front and not added on, that know the community, have those relationships, know the subject matter, even if it's not scholarly, but when you're part of a community, you know that community. Adam Dixon, we talked, is born and raised in Jonesboro. This is his home. And so it's really important that in that collaborative process in any oral history project is recognizing what you don't know and find people that do and center them at the beginning, at the center those people and those resources right at the beginning of the project, in any project we have going forward.
Cecily, I agree wholeheartedly with Kieran. The building the trust with the community is going to be key. It might be a whole lot of listening and very little talking. Sometimes communities, particularly small rural minority communities, there might be this sentiment that they may feel that they're going to be again stereotyped or misperceived. They don't want to be taken advantage of, so sometimes they remain distant, and so there has to be that outpouring if folks wish to engage them. Sometimes some people have been taken advantage of. For example, you reach out to a community Individuals apply for grants, are able to get funding, and then the community never sees it. One of the things that was really powerful about Freedom Stories was that the community saw the whole process. The community, it was very transparent. The community was involved in the process. And so a lot of people felt as if that there was a good faith effort back and forth. It wasn't anything extractive. Let me say it that way. It was very participatory and very inclusive. And so I think that if you're going to interact with rural minority communities, build the trust, do your share of listening, and then also be as transparent as you can be, so that the community feels that sense of uplift as well.
Right. And I would just simply add, before we did anything in terms of a presentation, we did have that public discussion. What is it that you want this story to do? Kieran did it when he was applying for the grant. I tried to follow Kieran's example when we began to plan the stories by bringing in community leaders and others and ask for their suggestion and input. Sometimes that's all it took, was the ability to say, we respect your opinion and what you want to see in this program. And they are very clear about it. And so in many ways, they gave me the marching orders for Freedom Stories and how to best represent their interest. And I think that is another reason the program was so successful.
Thank you so much, all of you. We are just about out of time. So I just want to take a second to say thanks for doing this phenomenal work. Thank you to the NEH for funding it and offering support that makes work like this possible. Thank you to our listeners. You can follow up on the International Storytelling Center on their website. You can get access to a lot more information about Freedom Stories on the website. Kieran, do you want to shout out anything that you're doing next really quickly for our audience?
Oh, yes, you put me on the spot. The 50th anniversary. The 50th anniversary will be next year, but remember, it's not just our 50th, it's the nation's 50th storytelling revival. It's a national celebration. Come home to Jonesboro, but also celebrate where you are. And I also like to express my thanks to Dr. Turley, Mr. Adam Dixon, Dr. Cicely Hill, and the NEHA, but also the National Endowment for Humanities, those that support elected officials, that support the humanities and the American people for believing in this program.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.